And interesting that the markets had been rallying so far this week, Riccardo. We've got Australia, China, incentivizing some stimulus. They're cutting rates, but no move from the ECB, no move from the UK, not from the US either in terms of signalling from Ben Bernanke. Are you expecting coordinated stimulus to come from these other countries going forward in the next month?
Well, I think if things worsen dramatically, there will be something. Perhaps not coordinating in the sense of doing exactly the same things, because we know conditions are different, monetary policy styles are different. I think there will definitely be actions if things get really ugly.
If there are actions, Bernanke, interestingly, saying actually we're getting a law of diminishing returns here in terms of quantitative easing, in terms of what central banks can actually do. Do you think an LTRO, more moves by the ECB, could really inject any sort of stimulus?
I think the LTRO is problematic right now because the conditions are different from the end of last year. The ECB was responding to signs of credit crunch. Today, the only thing we could expect from an LTRO would be that, say, Spanish banks would be able to buy more government bonds. But that would unnerve investors even further.
Feeds into the vicious cycle that we've been seeing.
Yeah, so I don't think that's the solution. What we need to see is in all these countries that you have mentioned, some action on the fiscal front that then puts the central bank in a more comfortable position deploying further stimulus. I think in Europe, for example, we need to see prompt actions from a governance point of view in terms of what's going on in Spain in particular, and then the ECB can definitely do something. And I think the reason why they didn't announce any policy changes this week is because they're waiting to see A, what happens to the German business cycle, and B, what happens at the European level, and C, what happens in the Greek elections.
So they want to keep the pressure on the politicians. What are you envisaging to see in terms of Spain? Are you expecting the government to have to be forced to take a whole bailout? Would it just be to the banks? Will they be able to avoid any sort of money injection from Europe overall?
I think probably they will have to rely on European support. The rules are that the support is for governments and is for governments to intervene into banks if necessary. I don't see why the rules should be changed. What I think is that there should be a light version of the programs we've seen elsewhere, focusing in particular on the banking system and on the autonomous regions, which means putting their finances into order, controlling them better, coordinating better between central and local governments, well, regional in particular. That could be the scope of this EU-IMF program, and hopefully Spain would continue to issue government bonds in the meantime.
And Riccardo, why would it should be allowed a light version of monitoring compared to the likes of Greece, Ireland, Portugal? They're still going for a bailout. Is it because if it was the stance, if they were to go for a bailout, why light? Is it because that they have been following labour market overhauls? They have been trying to do something to conform to the fiscal rules that Merkel wants to see?
Yeah, I think, first of all, because Spain is more compliant overall. There's less of a need to overhaul the whole economy. And secondly, it's obviously a bigger country, a proud country that came into this crisis with excellent public finances, at least at face value. And so politically, that has to be acknowledged. I also think we've learned from experience. Although it's not publicly admitted, mistakes were made in the approach to the previous crises. I think this time we have to learn from those mistakes. We also have to be mindful of the resources available in the so-called firewalls. If Europe were to deploy the whole thing, fund Spain across the board, it wouldn't have any money to do anything else. So there's also that factor that Spain is very big, costs a lot of money to bail out.
And of course the concern is contagion. It's been flowing from Greece. That is where we've seen a lot of the market instability come in, is because of the elections that we're now having to see a second round of. Yeah. What do you expect for June the 17th in terms of Greece?
Well, it's a tough call because the opinion polls have been giving conflicting signals. I think there's, my judgment is the probability of the center-right winning a plurality is slightly higher than 60%, than 50%, I should say. And that would lead to a coalition that can negotiate with the EU-IMF some revisions of the program. But of course, there is a high probability of a hung parliament. So the week after next, we could be waking up to a situation in which we see more meetings in Athens among the political parties, more posturing and no specific decisions, and that will mean that the crisis drags on for longer. Now, when people say Greece will decide to leave the euro, I don't see it. It may be forced to do so, but it will not be a conscious decision by the political parties.
It would have to come from the side of the Eurozone leaders, from the side of the ECB, etc. But do you have a gut instinct, or do you have a personal view on, are you optimistic Eurozone leaders can now bring together the policies that the market needs to ease the tensions, or are you foreseeing these sorts of levels of borrowing costs of Spain and Italy, these sorts of tensions in the equity markets for the foreseeable until the end of the year?
I think they're willing to do something. I'm not sure they can deliver what would really change perceptions, because if they did, then I think the ECB would be in a position of easing policy more aggressively, and we would have a window of a few months, perhaps longer than that, of strong financial markets that in turn would feed back into the economy. But in order for the ECB to confidently do that, we must see clear decisions, a measure of consensus, and also a feeling that we are beginning to talk seriously about fiscal union, however difficult it may be, however long it may take. But that's a precondition for the ECB to be more daring in its policies.
Riccardo Barbieri, thank you very much for joining us today. Chief European Economist at Mizuho International. Great to get his views across Europe.